give me a little intro of each one, starting with the lady in the house.
Hi, I'm Caitlin. I've been watching Jonathan's videos since like 2017, so pretty much when the channel started. So I'm very familiar with his work, and I have a background in music and voiceover acting, and I'm also a new convert to the Orthodox Church, thanks to Jonathan. Pretty much. So,
Wow, that I did
yeah.
not know. That's awesome. Next, thank you.
All right, I'm Andrew Rodriguez. I'm a Christian therapist in Pottstown, PA. I've been following Jordan Peterson since I first Jordan Peterson, and then introduced me to Jonathan Pageau. So ever since then, I've been digging his content. I'm a non-denominational evangelical Christian, but I've been growing in my appreciation of the more sacramental side of the church, and going back probably even before discovering Jonathan Pageau. So like since 2015, when I started studying theology of the body,
Awesome.
Thanks to Christopher West. So, yeah, and I'm a big comic book guy. So
You said you do some drawing here.
Yeah, I used to have a webcomic I would do, and if I wasn't a therapist, I would be a comic book artist.
Wow,
so
awesome.
I got some of my art up here, but you can't see it just with the camera where it's at. So yeah.
Thank you, bro. Thank you for your time.
Thanks.
All right, Nicholas, your turn.
Okay. I hate introductions. For the purposes of this exercise, I'm a fantasy author. I've known Jonathan for a while now. I've loved his work ever since I found him. I actually started our conversation started way back in the Orthodox Arts Journal days, which I think is even before he started to do his videos. So I really appreciated his and Andrew Gould. He's the other founder of the website. Their approach to art and its interaction and intersection with culture. And so that's where I work. I have two podcasts, one in which I retell Russian and other fairy tales, and a new one that I just started where I discuss why fantasy fiction is important, how it works, what books are good and why, and kind of just I gush about different things that I like, and then I also rant about things I don't like. That's called Fantasy for Our Time. It's brand new. So, and I'm also a deacon in the Orthodox Church. So
awesome.
There you go.
We all have different skill sets, and what's bringing us together today is his brand new God's Dog Monster graphic novel, Volume 1. So all of us have read it. I want to start with just an overall, what did you think about it? Just kind of overall perspective of what you thought about it. So we'll start with Andrew this time.
Okay. I think it mostly whet my palate. I'm hungry for more. So it was an intro, and I know people have been dying for him to get this thing out there, so we've been eagerly waiting. I thought it was a good intro to the characters and kind of set the stage for some things. I'm more eagerly waiting to see what happens next because it was very much cinematic in its storytelling, right. Which kind of, it was originally supposed to be a screenplay, so it makes sense.
Right.
And that's kind of fitting. There's around 2002, a lot of comic books started taking this sort of like cinematic style where nothing would happen for the most part, right. in a single issue. And they're basically writing their comics for a trade where you collect like 6 issues and it made a complete story. So it sort of feels like, all right, there's a lot that we're waiting to see happen. So I'm eagerly awaiting more. So that's my first impression. It kind of whet my appetite.
All right. At any time, anybody wants to jump in with a question, go for it. It's an open conversation. Let's go down to Nicholas. I know you did an interview with him. I avoided all God Dog reviews and everything because I wanted to go in, just pure raw. But I'm definitely gonna go check that one out. I've been waiting for that one. I haven't saved. But you got to read it before everybody else.
Yep.
So So you spent more time thinking about it. What's your perspective on just overall?
No, man. Yeah, I was very honored when he reached out, when Jonathan reached out to me and offered me. In fact, what he offered me was the incomplete version. Some of the panels weren't illustrated yet at the very end, so I got a really early version. But it had most of the story in place. So, and he was made a point of warning me that there is a cliffhanger. So make sure that you keep that in mind, but also let me know if that cliffhanger actually works, if it's something that's going to make people mad, or keep them just hungry enough. So I didn't know what to expect. So just a bit of background. I wrote for Orthodox Arts Journal. I wrote a whole series of posts way back when. Jonathan was one of my editors on how saints' lives work, how the specific genre of hagiography works within the culture of the Christian church, going way back. And this is not something that a lot of people know, but there actually is a lot of room for legendary representations of the saints in the saints' lives. And the reasoning for that's really simple. It's because oftentimes the people who wrote the lives were not working with firsthand accounts of these saints' lives for various reasons.
Right.
Sometimes they would write the lives 6, 7, 8 centuries later, and there were no written monuments of those saints at all. In one particularly graphic case, there was one saint called Saint Abercius. Was a 2nd century saint, and nobody knew who he was until like the 7th or 8th, when there was an archaeological artifact found that mentioned him as a bishop and a saint of the 2nd century. So he's really early on, cool. But nobody even knew about his existence until that point. So the hagiographer, the writer of his life, was tasked with writing a life. Nothing except a tiny little stone mentioned just his name and a few other details about his life. So there is a life. It's very detailed. It has a lot of really interesting semi-legendary kind of stuff. There's serpents. There's destruction of pagan idols in temples. The kind of things that more rationalistic Christians tend to dismiss as fake and not real, therefore we shouldn't read it. But that's not how the early church especially, looked at these. There was a lot of room for creativity, as long as it fit within the rules of the genre. And the genre was like iconography in a lot of ways. It was very symbolic. It was all about sketching out sort of general tones and general ideas about the saint. And as long as it made sense for the kind of saint that was, and since this was a 2nd century saint, which means apostolic or immediately post-apostolic time, a lot of pagans. So you're going to have a lot of visual and obvious examples of miraculous power, the kind of stuff you find in the Acts of the Apostles, right? So that kind of stuff makes it very clearly into that life. So I've never had trouble with this genre of sort of creative hagiography. Some of it is officially accepted by both the Catholic and Orthodox Church as kind of canonical and accepted as actually referring to the saint's life, even if we don't actually know the historical details of the saint's life. But other things are more legendary, and the church accepts them as more legendary, is kind of slightly beyond the canon, not something you would read in church, not something that you would preach about from the pulpit, but still a form of popular literature, or oral literature most of the time, that edifies, that gives us a good idea of who the saints are, and that has a certain positive effect in terms of teaching the people who are listening about who the saints are. So I actually think that God's Dog fits really well in this general genre of creative hagiography. It's not something that we've seen a lot of in the last few centuries, because the saints that have come down to us, especially more recently, we know them. We have ways of tabulating their lives. We have ways of knowing who they were, what they said. And nowadays, I mean, the saints of the 20th century, we have recordings, right? And we have, eyewitness accounts and things like this. So it's more difficult to see a place for that kind of creative hagiography. So with Jonathan doing this, which is basically taking a lot of the symbolic structure of a life of a saint, but making it fantastical and making it adventure and making it fairy tale and making it exciting and accessible to the regular reader, that's everything that I want from my fantasy. So I love it. I thought it was absolutely fantastic.
And Nicholas, I'm curious then, are you mentioning all that because has there been like backlash or like pushback against the elaboration that's in the story?
I'm saying that I haven't heard any specific backlash against God's dog, but I'm constantly dealing with backlash of this kind from more rigorous-minded Christians who don't really see a point in any sort of imaginative literature or storytelling. There's a movement especially in sort of rigorous Orthodox circles that tends to downplay the importance of any sort of storytelling as insignificant and, in fact, possibly harmful, which is nonsense.
Yeah, and I grew up in a fundamentalist Latino church, which is the hardest of the hard.
Yeah, it is.
Nothing imaginary. That's all like this guy.
Mhm.
You know, I couldn't grow up. I didn't go to the theater. The first time I went to the theater was to see Beetlejuice, and to
Wow.
go from nothing,
That must have been a shock.
it was like amazing. I fell in love with the theater, but the theater was evil. I wouldn't read any fiction.
Mhm.
I would skip school, go to the library, and read nonfiction books. And
Oh man.
I'm thinking about it, I'm like, why did I have all this fiction? But in my brain, it was like, that's fiction, that's lies, and that's how the
Mhm.
church indoctrinates you. And you know, it was a Protestant church, so everything you're talking about the rationalistic, and then we'll add on top of that the emotional because it was charismatic. So now it gets even crazy. But I want to get back to some points later on after we talk to Caitlin.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably just going to repeat a lot of what you guys said, but
okay.
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of, I'm just really excited to see it, and I'm mostly just waiting for more. I'm just like, that's my only complaint. It's too short. So I'm really excited for book 2. I'm glad that we got a little bit of a preview of the next one. And I think it did a really good job of setting the stage, the characters and everything. I really like the structure of it. And I really like what you said, Nicholas, about putting a name on a creative hagiography. I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what's kind of struck me at first. Is I think our first preview was like the intro, and he right away started with Christ, Adam and Eve, and everything. I'm just like, wow, this is amazing. And so it's really interesting I've never really seen anything like that. At least recently, I haven't seen anything where it's not just a fictional story. It's more make something more participative because it has to do with like real stories that that are part of, our history, but also being creative with it and having these stories overlap and interact with each other. So I was really excited to see that. So
awesome. As a storyteller, I'm fascinated with structure. I love the more complicated, the better. But because it's complicated doesn't mean the story is better. But in this sense, there's so many layers, and it each layer enhances and adds new meaning to the story. So, for example, we'll start with the beginning, the retelling of Genesis. He focuses on the garments of skin, but it's you have the priest, kind of like two stories, the real world, and then kind of the frame narrative world with the garments. Did you get anything new? The whole concept of the garments of skin is a new concept to me. I've been studying for a while. I find it fascinating. I think that's the first symbol that really pops out. So anybody in the panel, what's your thoughts on that? Him focusing on that.
It's not how I would expect it to go, right? I mean, the garments of skin, the way I've always interacted with it in the book of Genesis itself, it seems to be always a pretty negative thing. Like it has to do with the first death. Some holy fathers talk about, I don't remember the exact quote, so I might be wrong about this, but I remember being taught, possibly in seminary, that some fathers talked about the garment of skin being God actually killing an animal to provide Adam and Eve with clothing. So the immediate effects of the fall of man were the appearance of death in the animal world, as in violent death outside of the natural order of nature, right? But here was something else. Here, because he's taking from other traditions, from Enochic traditions, and sort of paracanonical traditions. And here, at first, I was like, I don't quite understand what's going on. Like, why the Garden of Skin? It's like it's on the one hand, it's a relic. On the other hand, it might be a source of power that can be used by an evil creature. So it seems to be ambivalent. Like it's not good, it's not bad, it's something in the middle. So I'm like, okay, that's weird. And how does that even fit? But then I listened to him give a lecture on the Book of Genesis, where he talks about the symbolic structure, and I guess he took a lot of it from the book that he and his brother wrote.
Right.
And there he really focused on the idea of potentiality, of order coming out of a larger chaotic potentiality as being the natural way that God creates. He creates chaos, creates potential, and then from that potential he gathers order, and then he gives that power to man. So when I was talking to him in our conversation before, the one that you didn't watch yet, Moses, he made that point that this is like the reason that it can go either way, can be either good or evil, is because this is an object of potentiality, an object of chaos, which doesn't mean it's evil, but it can be misused in the wrong hands. But it can also be a source of great holiness in the right hands. So that's not something you normally find in traditional hagiographical narratives. This is more straight up adventure fantasy, and I like it.
It's a straight up new idea for me. Go ahead, Andrew. You want to say something?
No, go ahead, because I was gonna. Well, all right. So I was gonna say how that was provocative for me as well. How he showed that God showed man how to make the skins as a way to stop the fall and survive in the world of death. And I was like, "Ooh, that's that was kind of scandalous for him to word it that way."
Right.
And I was like, God gave him the skins to stop the fall. Well, the fall already happened. But then I remembered, wait, because I've heard Jonathan talk about the garments of skin so much that I'm like, okay, there's the technologies we use to ward off the effects of the fall, and it's also a precursor or a foreshadowing of what Christ does by becoming death. Jesus becomes the curse; he takes on death, and we end up wearing his righteousness in a way as well. So it's like he puts
on the garment of our skin, right? Like ultimately, he puts on the ultimate garment of skin, the garment of humanity.
Yeah, so it's in there, and he's saying it out loud in a way that's like, oh, yeah, it takes it back. It kind of makes you check your theology a bit and messes with it a little bit, but it works. And especially as the story goes on, you realize that it could be a blessing or a curse. And so the Nephilim are after it, and it had that curse in a way for when they do the story of St. George and the Dragon.
Right.
So I don't want to go too far ahead in the story, but yeah, it really was. That was like Jonathan always says, you can always tell what the meaning of a story is by the first scene.
Right.
And right there, he lays it out. This is what this book is about.
He talks about the world being fractal, and he's starting that in the first, in that first level there.
Yeah.
Let's see. In after the fall, did you have anything, Caitlin, you wanted to add to that about the garments of skin?
Yeah, I mean, I'm similar to Andrew. I'm like, I've heard Jonathan talk about garments of skin so many times, and I'm like, so when you're reading the story, I'm kind of like, oh yeah, I'm familiar with this, but then when I'm trying to think of other ways to express it, it's like what comes to mind is like, yeah, garments of death or garments of light. Like you said, it could be either a positive or negative thing. Depends on how it's used. It's technology, it's a covering, it's protection. And yeah, it is kind of like a way to stop the fall. It's kind of like to slow down the repercussions of the fall in order to, so. So I mean, obviously I think it's good too that he started off with that. It's obviously going to be a big part. And in the second preview, whatever, they had like, I don't know if anyone read that, but it was like the ascension of Elijah and Elijah's mantle, all of that. So I'm curious to see like how else it's going to like manifest. Like if we're going to keep getting these intros in every book, is it going to be Noah's Ark kind of like the skin and maybe a crown or something, or so many countless ways. But so I'm interested to see like how other ways it'll manifest in the story.
Yeah.
After the garden, the Fellowship starts going on their pilgrimage. I love the part with the whole the festival. You have half of them in church, the other half just like I'm gonna go to the party. Um, as they go there, they get the first introduction of the monster. Um, I love the way, especially the visual shots of almost like you can search in each frame for the monster. He's like hiding. You know, as they're traveling, you see like a silhouette of his nose, or I had to read it 3 times to like notice stuff like that. So I
Yeah,
love
it's like,
that you
where's
can.
Waldo?
Yeah, there you go. Uh, um, so you have the first introduction of the monster, and uh, uh, they end up in a camp, and they get attacked. Um, I think that's my favorite scene because visually, they set it up to get you to think it is the monster that's attacking them, and then there's a reversal. What'd you think of that whole setup? Anybody?
Well, all right. To the monster's credit, they attacked him. They threw a rock at him first, and so he was just defending himself.
Right.
But I'm wondering if we could actually go back a bit before that whole camp scene.
Go ahead.
When they're in the church, or actually when they're on their way to the village, they're singing a song. And I'm not Orthodox. I don't know all the hymns, but so I don't know if that was made up for the book or if it was an actual Orthodox hymn. But
yeah, it is. It's from Saint from the Syrian, I think.
And so right there, you see the continuation of the theme about the garments, because I was making notes about it. Right there is a basic gospel and the plot of the story as well. Right there in the lyrics of the hymn that they're singing, His glory shines upon the world and enlightens the very depths of the abyss. Like you already saw the abyss earlier. You saw the Leviathan or the dragon in that previous splash page, and then death is annihilated, night has vanished, and the gates of Sheol are broken, and creatures lying in darkness from ancient times are clothed in light. And I thought about that. It says that now they're clothed in light instead of now being clothed in garments of death and garments of skin. So it's a reversal now. We're going to exchange our garments of death for garments of light.
Right.
And then the dead arise from the dust and they sing because they have a savior. So like right there's the gospel laid out in that hymn as they're on their way to the village. So that stood out to me. He's continuing the theme in different, just little details like that.
Yeah, that's fun. I didn't notice that. I guess since we don't, as a Protestant, I don't know the songs, of the Orthodox Church and the hymns. So that's fascinating. I have to go back and look at that one. The next
Katie, is that one of the hymns of paradise?
I think so. I did like Google it because I was like, it sounds familiar. So I don't know. I do have Hymns of Paradise here, but I don't know if it's in there. But yeah, I think it was called like Hymn to the Light, pretty much. So
nice.
I know it is to Saint From the Syrian. So yeah, that was really cool to see that in there.
With each of the members, I like the way each of the members of the fellowship, their character, they each are distinct. With a lot of writing that I've, a lot of books that I read, you can't tell the difference between the characters. Here, they're comedic. You got the George himself, the leader. He is the what do they call him? The guardian of the skins. You got Daniel, which is the ex-priest. We got the young one. We got the older one that is he's kind of like the doubting, the one that's always
Victor.
doubting. And then the archer, might be a couple other ones there. Any thoughts on the different characters of the fellowship there?
Well, here's actually going to be one of my complaints is we don't get the names of the main characters early enough for me. Like, at least give me in the narrative, like maybe as Daniel is narrating a little bit, he could have given their names real quick. But that aside, they each have unique, not just looks, which I really like that about Cord's style. A lot of comic books especially more superhero type comic book artists, everyone looks the same, and you just tell them apart by their costume. But he gives each person a character in their look as well as their personality is very evident. Like Mercurius, I look at him, I'm like, he's shifty. There's something about him, you know. He evokes also. So Mercurius, the name itself comes from the god Mercury.
Okay.
And so the word mercurial means to be swift and thievish and kind of mysterious and edgy. But you see in him, he's
a trickster.
He's a trickster character. So I was like, I wonder what's going to happen with him. But at the same time, I didn't know this because I'm not too familiar with all the saints. He's also one of the saints who ends up having some dog-headed men as companions. So I was at first a bit skeptical about him, but now I'm curious where he might take his character. I'm fascinated.
Oh, okay. Awesome.
Yeah, I like the distinction between all the characters. I think in The Secrets it said that he kind of based the characters off of the four humors, like all that ancient Greek stuff. Like, yeah, that works pretty well. Yeah, Mercurius is interesting, and like you said, named God Mercury and that kind of airy trickster kind of energy. And I think that he does tease in this preview that there's more to come from Mercurius, that George is going to like pass things down to him. And I think in the Saints legend he has something to do with the Archangel Michael, where his name means like holder of two swords. So I think in one of the legends, Archangel Michael gives him a sword. So that probably would play into the story at some point. The sword is, I guess, a garment is a weapon. Any type of weapon would be a garment of skin. So it would probably relate to that.
I didn't realize that the part about the four humors. I didn't read The Secrets of God's Dog.
Okay. Yeah.
Yet. So I just wanted to, as a writer, you might think that having an existing structure, an existing character trope to work with, might be something that's easy to do because all the qualities of the character already present to you, but based on ancient mythology. But it's the hardest thing to take an existing trope and make it unique. Because when people already have expectations of a certain character, of a certain type, especially like something as obvious as the four humors, it's actually really hard to make those specific characters distinctive in a way that isn't just archetypal. Because archetypal anybody can do, but archetypal and personal and sort of with definite qualities and characteristics that are immediately obvious in that particular setting, in that particular story, that's really hard to do. And he does it really well. So that's really cool.
Going back to the garments of skins, in the first reading, I was confused because he was like he called George the guardian of the skins. I thought it was that thing that was hanging with the little, I didn't know it was the sword. That blew me away after, I think, the third. It's the thing that another thing.
Oh, I thought it was the sheath.
Yeah, that's what I thought in the beginning. Nicholas, are we
off?
Could be both.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, both. Why can't it be both? I guess. Yeah.
And
I think it's primarily the sheath. I think.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay.
But when you look at the first panel with the angel protecting Eden, he has the same exact sword, the same design. So what does that mean?
Is it the same sword, same hilt?
Yep. It has the little serpent.
Okay, so this is brilliant. This is absolutely brilliant. I don't know if this is what he's thinking, but
awesome.
this could be it. Okay, so there's I don't know if you guys have ever read the novel Loris by Evgeny Vodolazkin. It was popular a few years ago. It's a Russian novelist. His novel called Loris. Loris is the primary name. It's a retelling it's a fake 16th century life of a saint with fantastical elements to it. It became very popular in English for a short time, and a lot of Orthodox people were going crazy about it, but it also became more widely popular. Not kind of super popular, but well known enough in the larger space that people were talking about it.
Right.
He's a specialist in medieval Russian literature. He has these amazing articles on First Things magazine where he talks about the medieval mindset and how medieval people saw the world differently than we do. And basically his point is how, postmodern people tend to think that history works like a progression and that we're far more advanced than the people were before us, and they were simple and stupid, and we're kind of more enlightened, things like this.
Evolved.
And by thinking that we don't even consider some aspects of their mindset that are so foreign to the way we think that we don't even imagine it exists. And one of them is this, Christians, especially in Russia, had this comfort with the cyclical nature of time. But cyclical not in the sense of repeating all over and over again, which is more Buddhist or Hindu,
Right.
but kind of repeating in a pattern that moves forward with history as well. So the cycle of the church year, for example, is an ever repeating series of days that in which the worshiper takes part in the events that we remember, but more than just a remembrance, in a kind of ritual participation outside of time. It's only possible inside the church building. So when the parishioner comes to church on Easter, the hymns are all in first person, right? So it's we are at Easter. We're not remembering Easter. We are at Easter. The hymnography is very clear about that. But it's not the same Easter every year, right? Because every year we're different, and every year we come another time.
Right.
So it's the simultaneous extension outwards and extension upwards, like a cross, right? So it's cyclical, but it's also moving forward like a helix. In that kind of a mindset, it's totally normal for things like this to happen. So there are two saints. Both of them are named Kirill in Russia. One of them lived in the 16th century. One of them lived in the 13th century, something like that, right? So when the life of the one in the 16th century was written, it contains elements that repeat the life of the Kirill who lived in the 13th century, sometimes like word for word. So certain things that happen to him in childhood, certain things that happen to him in adulthood, etc. Right? It's like some things that are just mirror images. And to a modern reader, it's like, well, they copied it. But to a person in the 16th century, it would be like, well, of course he had the same life.
Right.
His name was Kirill, right? So like it's enough. There's enough potential and power in the name that, of course, certain aspects of that person's life would mirror the life of the previous one because they are connected by name, connected by common saint, connected by the repeating patterns of history that are the same, but they're different. So if the sword of Michael is then seen in the hands of George or whoever, doesn't necessarily have to be the same sword.
Okay.
But it is the same sword, right?
Can I say, so this also reminds me of, I'm sure we all listen to the Lord of Spirits, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Or most of us do. So there's the episode when they were going over the appearances of Christ in the Old Testament, and one of the callers had the question, is the epiphanies or the Christophanies of Jesus in the Old Testament, are those his post-resurrection?
Right.
And they're like, yes. And so I'm like, when you started saying cyclical, it made me think of that right away. Like, so the sword George has is not yet a flaming sword, but perhaps post-resurrection or post, whatever, maybe at some point it becomes that, and that's the same sword that Michael uses because the angels and God exist outside of time.
Right. You have mythic time and then kind of our time and things that happen. So literally, we're still in the fall. We're still falling in that sense. And I like he did the analogy of the ark, where everything around you is chaos, and they had to build the ark to get through that chaos to the other side. When we get to a little bit more than the middle of the novel, we get introduced more to the beast, to the monster, and we hear him talk for the first time. For me, it was very emotional. I don't know how they did it. I'd like to get your thoughts on that scene. It was a great battle.
Caitlin, why don't you go, since it looked like you were about to say something?
I really like that scene. I think it was done really well, where I'm just trying to look at it here so that I can remember exactly. First he's shot with the arrow, and then the night before, and then I like he came in and then he appeared intimidating, but then collapsed and all of that. And I like how they put the contrast of their reactions to the different characters. I think Victor is the one who's like, this is, he's a monster.
Right.
Horrible. And then I think it was, sometimes I would get the characters confused. I only read God's Dog like 2 times, so sorry if I make a mistake with the names. So I don't know if it was Mercurius or Simon. I think it was Simon, right? Who was just like, oh, freedom's great. Oh my gosh, something new, like a stranger. So it's exciting. So, seeing those 2 extremes of reactions, obviously there's going to be development there. So I think that was done really well. Seeing how the 2 possible reactions to chaos or to the unknown or to the stranger, and seeing where that could lead you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I like the way he was leaving the food at the margins, and at one point he said they before they get attacked by the giants, they say I think it was Victor's like, the dog Bran, he brought the giants to us, and I started realizing no, the dog, he's attracted to the garments of skins too. He's being pulled, they're all being pulled to that moment. But the whole scene with the giants attacking and the monster saving their lives. I like the introduction of the giants. What did you guys think of the giants?
Well, when they're in the village, I'm not sure you guys noticed it. You see in the crowd scene, you see the silhouette of the giant behind the crowd of people. And then later, when the crowd disperses, you see the giant leaving the crowd, and you see the mark on his chest. And of course, I'm like, people didn't notice this gigantic dude there. But there's good little Easter eggs or nods to or foreshadowing of the giants coming. So I remember the first time I read it, it was a little confusing at first who Christopher was fighting.
Right.
Because it looked like
and that was on
the
purpose.
giants. Yeah, the giants were coming out of a tent, so it seemed like he was fighting one of the people, but they were already in the tent killing some guy.
Exactly.
And then so it made sense. I'm like, okay, I have to like go back to a couple pages and look at that again to understand.
And that was a visual. It was a visual setup because Victor came out with his knife, hearing they killed his dog, so he's coming out, and then they flip to another tent, and so you get confused how they're doing it. But
so
I think
it's like you can understand their confusion about who's the enemy, and so. But then when you see behind George and Mercurius, the giant, that was an awesome panel there. I was like, that's great. So it was a good action scene. They did a good job with it.
So the world of the giants, I thought was one of the most fascinating. You see all these different ruins and relics. What do you think of that part?
Yeah, actually, and that reminds me too what Nicholas was saying earlier about the cyclical thing. We find at the end that the leader is Nimrod, but it's not the same Nimrod from the Tower of Babel.
Right.
It's like a descendant or someone who's basically repeating the pattern.
From the line of Nimrod, yep.
Yeah, so there you go. There's that same idea, the cyclical nature of it all. Of course, Jonathan elaborates on this in The Secrets of God's Dog about how it was like a shambles. It's not Babel in its glory.
Right.
And it's also like a big amalgamation of different cultures and other mythologies, because you see all these other different statues and things that shows like this is a bit of a mess.
Right.
It's chaos. It's a city, yet it's chaos still.
It reminded me of when the Joker unleashed all the asylum people. They destroyed Gotham, and it was just like, it looked like that, just shambles, broken down. But you still got to see the fragments of Gotham sticking out, and so that was fascinating.
Historically speaking, that's a really interesting thing, because the traditional enemy of the Roman Empire, even after it becomes Christian, is the Persians, and the Persians are the synthesis of all that stuff. The Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Sumerians. All those things kind of came together to create the Persians. So the Persians were not really their own thing. They were a kind of hodgepodge collection of different shambles, a kind of golem or a reanimated corpse in some sense of all these previously great civilizations, especially after the coming of Christ, because Persia was strong for a while and then Alexander the Great got rid of them. But they kept on kind of being a thorn in the side even during the times of the Byzantine emperors. So it really makes sense that Jonathan would use that aesthetic, because a lot of that aesthetic is very Eastern, very, from the Roman perspective, very barbarian, very Persian, very Sumerian, Akkadian, that sort of thing, but not specific, like very general with a lot of different interesting influences coming together. But I like the Joker comment. It's good. Like, Joker can only create by taking the shambles of humanity and unleashing them on order and just laughing, as it all goes up
an agent of chaos. That's what he likes to do.
Yeah.
And then by having a tyrant king, it sort of shows where clown world of it inevitably leads to tyranny.
Exactly. I felt sad for the animals. The animals, I guess he was experimenting on them, or he had them in his room.
But that's the hybridity thing, right? That's Jonathan's always talking about the dangers of hybridity, and that, I mean, that's what it is. If you're experimenting with animals, what are you doing? You're trying out different versions of different animals. Maybe you haven't yet graduated to the idea of combining human and animal, but that's just around the corner. Right.
And the fact that he wants the garment of skins, that's technology. It's just an advancing of technology.
It's power.
Yep. The one story we didn't talk about, I want Caitlin to say something about this one. The princess. The story of the princess. What'd you think of that?
I'm interested to see where that leads. I mean, it's the just legend of St. George and the dragon slaying.
Is that
I'm interested to
legend?
See what.
Is it a true legend, or did he make it up for the book?
St. George. Sorry if I make a mistake, but he slayed a dragon by making the sign of the cross. And it was within a kingdom where they were sacrificing like one virgin a year. So pretty much a retelling of the life of St. George. And I was interested to see like where, because it kind of ended with George not taking her hand in marriage, and then she goes off into the desert. So I'm like, okay, where is she now?
Exactly.
And what's her name? The name.
It's not over yet.
I wonder. Yeah.
So I wonder if she'll be like a type of desert mother, or is she going to be like held captive again? Where are we going to go with that? So I'm definitely interested.
That's
definitely interesting because.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
I was saying, or a woman scorned. I wonder, will she be an enemy up in the future?
Is she going to team up with Nimrod?
I hope not. That would be terrible.
Or will she become a Wonder Woman and fight with the Fellowship?
There was a part in that story too that I wrote that really stood out to me when she was talking to George, and she's talking about how she's going to go and sacrifice herself to the dragon. He's like, well, we should kill it. She's like, men don't kill dragons. And he's like, that's a shame, because that's exactly what men should do. And there's a picture of masculinity right there. Like, go out and slay the dragon.
In a bar.
It's an upside down world.
It wasn't his first time. He was out there. He was confident.
Yep. But it really just shows how upside down everything was, where it's men sending out women to go and be the head, be the one that gets chopped off, and to sacrifice herself. And when it's men are supposed to be the ones who go out, women stay safe, we go out and take potentially risk our lives to take down the dragons and whatever enemies that are out there beyond the gates.
So that trope of sacrificing the virgin to the dragon, it's extremely old. Right, it shows up in Roman legends. C.S. Lewis retold it as part of his Psyche myth, Till We Have Faces. That shows up there. It shows up in almost every single folkloric tradition you can find. There's always a dragon. The dragon insists on virgins being sacrificed, one at a time, one a month, one a year, whatever it is. And I'm really curious to see what happens to her as well, because in the life or the legend, depending on how you look at it, we don't really know what happens to her, as far as I remember. There is a queen who is commemorated on the same day, Saint George. Her name is Alexandra. But the historical queen and the queen who was rescued from the dragon, they don't appear as the same thing in all lives. And what happens here, they could be two different women. And what's interesting about this is that, I don't know if you all have read Tolkien's work at all, but Tolkien believed that one of the things that Christ did by coming to Earth was he provided a historical template for all fairy tales by living through the hero's journey, by acting out the ancient patterns of the heroic quest. He made it part of history. And so every story that happened before the coming of Christ is a prophecy, and every fairy tale that happens that is told after the coming of Christ, is a reminder of what already happened. So he believed that the form of the fairy tale, the form of fantasy in some sense, is in a lot of ways kind of the best form of storytelling you can have, because it hints at the greatest story ever told, the legend that became the legend that became fact, the myth that became history. And I think this is what's happening in the story of Saint George and the princess, is that it follows all of the same rhythms as all of the old legends, but it happened in real life. So it's like he's recapturing the same power that Christ had by living the myth inside history. And so I'm really interested to see where Jonathan goes with her as a character, as well as George, because George he's such an interesting guy. He's he's kind of carrying this burden, right? He's
like Frodo.
Yeah.
Yep, that's right.
Exactly.
Sam gets all he gets the prize of the wife and the village, and right. Frodo has to go wounded with the elves.
That's right. Yeah.
We're coming down to our time. I want to ask one last question. These two brothers have created this great work. How do you think pop culture is going to accept it? And how is the church going to accept it? You're going to see any pullback on either one? It's open to anybody.
All right. So I love it, but I'm also a realist because I'm a big comic book fan, and the comic book industry is dying. So people don't buy comics, like they used to. The industry uses comics as an IP farm.
Yep.
That then they can justify making movies and shows based off them, and they can say, "Oh, it's based off the comic books." When it's like I'm a big Marvel and DC fan, and they are just bastardizing all of them now these days to fit a woke agenda.
Right.
So, they don't really care about the comics like they used to. It's really just, how can we get this out there on screen in some way? They already tried going the screen route with God's Dog. That wasn't appealing. And at this point, you don't want to present it to Hollywood. They would ruin it.
It's crazy out there now.
I think I would have very modest predictions about how big a cultural impact it'll have to the mainstream. I hope that it'll serve as like a cult hit among those of us who are interested in this type of stuff, and be a really cool way to introduce things to the uninitiated.
Right.
So how that grows, God can do anything with it.
Oh, absolutely.
But,
and that's the X factor, because it really is. The two brothers have developed with the artist almost like Theology 101 with the visuals, presenting this new angle on the theology, and then throwing it into pop culture. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do. Nicholas, what do you think the church, how they're going to respond?
Well, I mean, what do you mean by the church? It's difficult to look at the church as a monolith, because it's not. Yeah. There's a lot of different voices, a lot of different groups. I think that the primary audience will be within the church, certainly. I think this is going to have a strong resonance with a lot of people. There will be some pushback for sure, but there's pushback to everything. It doesn't even matter if it's in the church. Any sort of religion adjacent or spiritual adjacent IP is always greeted by a certain segment of the population with a lot of anger. But I think we've gotten to the point now with Jonathan talking about these things and about just his success and the obvious fact of him attracting people to the church with his work. And Caitlin being an obvious example, but I mean, it's not. I mean, I've talked to so many people that have come to the church through interaction with popular media,
Right.
and partially with Jonathan's stuff. I think there's going to be a real resonance, but it's not going to happen now immediately. What I really hope will happen is that this is going to be the beginning of a gathering of Christian creatives and Christian audiences around a single locus point, so that we know, so we get to the point where there's enough of us that are creating really high quality, good stuff in different genres, but all with a similar kind of ethos, a similar kind of worldview, a similar kind of high level of quality. That the people that we already attract are going to flock to us and help us create that thing collaboratively, because you need people, you need money, you need space, you need networks, you need a lot of different things. And I hope that's what's going to start happening, a kind of bubbling up of a new movement that's going to become self-sustaining.
Yeah.
Because really, you don't need that many people. Like, the age of the blockbuster is done.
Yep.
So what you need is a following that's small enough but mighty enough to be able to keep itself going, and that's what I hope will happen here.
Yeah.
So it's like a little seed that's gonna start growing and growing, and they raised $230,000. That's fantastic. That's a lot
It's
of
amazing.
interest. So we're really gonna see the next book, if they can raise enough to see if the interest is still there.
Oh yeah, I think it'll be even more.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
That's my prediction.
Because now the first one's out, people can read it, and then you get buy-in.
Yep. And I know the hardcover is coming out soon. Caitlin, were you a comic book reader before? You a big comic book reader, or?
No. I don't know about comic books. I'll have to ask my fiance. I'll be like, I wanted to show him God's Dog, so I think he would really like it.
Awesome.
And my brother as well. Yeah, so I mean, from as far as like how pop culture will respond to it, or the church, I mean, I guess it's interesting to see how the secular pop culture will respond to it, because it's a work that's so explicitly Christian, and I'm so excited about it, and because it's different from Lord of the Rings, from Tolkien's work, because it's not just a reminder of the Christian story or pattern of the Christian story. It's like fully like within it.
Right.
So I'm interested to see like how other people would respond to that. And as far as within the church, like, again, I don't know exactly what type of backlash would come from it as far as like this kind of creative hagiography genre. So I'm not, again, it's kind of the first instance of me seeing it, so I don't know. But I'm hoping to see a lot more of it. I like it, and I want to see other people within this community playing around with it, and and I'm interested in kind of playing around with it too, and seeing what comes from it. So I'm really glad that this kind of opens that door and be like, oh, I think this is okay. He's doing it, so other people can do it too.
Absolutely. Let's go around, and if you have anything to plug and your final, go ahead, Andrew.
Oh man, there's so much I could have talked about too. There are a couple other moments, but if you want to just, we're running out of time here. I'm hearing an echo all of a sudden. You can find me on YouTube, Rumble, Facebook, all the places. Look for Psycho Bible, babbling about psychology and theology. So there's my shameless plug for myself. I'll just leave a couple of thoughts and real quick. Cord, I love the work. I'm glad he's now able to do this full time, so maybe he could put a little more work into the backgrounds. Some of the art they're missing background stuff there I want to see more of. And also I would say for the font is a little too small, especially if you're trying to read it digitally. So if we can make a bigger font size, that would be great. And there was a couple panels there that were really awesome. I wish I could talk about them real quick, but one of the parts I really loved was at the end when Christopher takes the guy who has the injury, and he carries him, and there's the foreshadowing of him carrying Christ.
Oh, fantastic.
So that was awesome to throw that in there at the end.
Awesome.
All right.
Go ahead, Nicholas.
You can find all the stuff that I do at my website, nicholaskotar.com. There's a lot, so strap in.
That's a good start, though. And Caitlin?
Yeah, I don't have anything to plug, but I can be found on Facebook or Twitter. My name is Caitlin, Caitlin. Last name Sanchez, Sanchez. So you'll be able to find me there.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your time, your
Thanks,
attention.
Moses.
And hopefully for volume 2, we could do it again.
Let's do it.
Yes.
Absolutely. You have a good night.
Good night,
Talk to you
guys.
later.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Bye.